So first of all, thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Adam Sandman and I'm the presenter today, and I'll be talking about SpiraTest. And today's meeting is focusing on introducing SpiraTest for people who have grown up using manual methods such as Microsoft Excel and are looking to learn how to use SpiraTest for the first time. So the first thing we'll be doing is setting up and configuring our new SpiraTest installation. It assumes we've already installed it, but we'll go through some of the basic configuration. We're then going to be creating a new blank project. We're then going to be writing some requirements, and what we will do is write some directly in the system, but we'll also show you how you can migrate some from a spreadsheet that you already have. We will then do the same thing for our test cases. We'll write a few and we'll also import some from Microsoft Excel. What we will then do is, once we've got our test cases, we will organize them into some test sets. We will then run a couple of the test sets. We'll log some results, include some screenshots. We'll probably find a test failure along the way and log a bug. And then at the end, we'll show you how you can report and get information. After that, we'll open it up for Q&A. And if you're listening to this recording, we will be putting this recording on our YouTube channel. If you have any comments and any other ideas for other webinars that you'd like us to do, please write in the comment section of our YouTube channel. And for those listening today, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel and linking to it on social media. And if you have any questions at the end or other suggestions, please bring them up at the end. So to go into the live application, here's SpiraTest running right now. And basically, when you first get the installation, you're going to have a system that looks like this. You've got 3 sample projects, and you will be logged in as a system administrator. And that's how you get the system. The first thing you'll often want to do is just go into the administration and make sure the system is correctly set up for you. So for example, if you've got it through our cloud service, you will have all the right settings for mail notifications. Otherwise, you may want to actually go in and set up some of those settings just to make sure that everything is set up the way you want it. So for example, we'll go into the general settings right here. And you can see we'll make sure that the default culture, the language we're using, the time zone, these are all set up correctly for our installation. We also might want to change the web server URL to match our installation itself. And actually this isn't correct, so we would go in here and we could just change it like that. Once you've done that, you're pretty much ready to use the system. Like that. So the first thing we'll do once you've got the system up and running and configured is you will go into the project section under right here. And if it's not expanded, you can just expand it. And what we'll do then is we'll create a new project. So we go into the add option. And this is our project. We'll be using this to store all of our test cases and all of our requirements. So we're going to call it new demo project. Feel free to give it a description, but you don't have to. And then what you can do is choose which group to put it in. When you first get the system, it's going to have 2 groups, external projects and internal projects. Feel free to choose either group. You can also, down the road, create your own groups as well. But for now, that's what we'll use one of those. And then after that, before you hit the insert button, you do have the option to also base this on an existing project. For today's demo, we're going to use the standard default template, but if you already had some projects in SpiraTest and you wanted to use the same customizations, the same custom fields or workflows, you could use that existing project. So we'll hit insert. And that creates our new project. And that's really easy. Once the project is created, we're ready to use the system. We just select our project. So it's highlighted, and once it's highlighted, the other thing we will typically want to do is make sure that all the members of our project have access to it. So we click on project membership right here under users, and we go to the add option, and we'll make sure that all the users that we intend to have on our project, for example, we'll make Fred a tester, and we'll make Joe a developer. We would give them access to the system. Otherwise, they will have access to the system, but not to the project. So we now have 3 members of our project: me, the system administrator, Joe, and Fred. Now, at this point in a real project, you could go and customize it. You could add custom fields, you could add workflows, you could change it, all the configuration, but there's nothing that you actually have to do. Everything else is purely optional. So we're just going to get started. And so we'll choose our project, the new demo project, on our main navigation bar. And at the beginning, you'll see that it's completely empty. There are no requirements, no test cases, no defects. All the dashboard is empty, and that's to be expected. What we'll do next, though, is go into the planning section under the planning menu and choose requirements. And this is the perfect place to put in some new requirements. Now, as I mentioned, we can write the requirements directly inside of SpiraTest, or we can do an import. So the first thing we'll do is create some directly in SpiraTest. You choose the insert button, and that creates a new requirement, and you can give it a name. So let's pretend we're going to create a new application that's testing an online library system. So we're going to be basically putting in some of our functional requirements right here. And if you use the Save in New feature, it lets you create and save at the same time. So there's our functional requirements. Under that, we'll have a section called Administration. And we'll also have maybe a section called User Management. And then lastly, let's just create one section called Authentication, because they have to be able to log in. So we've got 3 sections of requirements. And we can go in here and choose the option to insert a child, and that adds a requirement under the main requirement. So we're going to create a new requirement to log in with a username and password. The next thing we'll do is go under Administration, and we'll just add a new child requirement there that we should be able to create and delete users. Like that. So that's how you would enter some requirements directly in the system. Now these are all functional requirements, so we could also collapse them down and then indent them under administration. I mean under functional requirements like that. So there we go. We've now got a simple hierarchy of requirements. Sometimes, of course, we do have requirements already existing. And so we have here the sample spreadsheet that comes with the system. And if I open up this spreadsheet, ahead of time I've installed our import add-in from the SpiraTeam add-in section. And what you'll do is go to the Requirements tab, click on the Connect button, put in the same URL, login, and password that you're using to access the system, hit Connect, and now you can import these requirements. So what we'll do is we choose the project that we want, which is our new demo project, and we choose requirements. We could also choose test cases, which we'll do in a little bit of time. And then we're going to do export into Spira. And that's going to warn us that it's going to export the data into Spira. So we hit yes. And notice it's going to import the name of the requirement, it's going to import the type of requirement, the priority of it, the status of it, and also we've put in an estimate in story points. We haven't populated the release, the author, the owner, or other fields, but we could do that as well. As it does the import, it will assign a requirement ID to the particular requirements right here, and that way if you import a second time, it will be smart enough to do an update rather than duplicating them. If you want to import them a second time, you should go in here and delete those numbers, and that way it will do a fresh import. If we hit refresh, we'll now see we have some requirements, which is perfect. So So now that we have some requirements, before we begin the next part, which is to do the test case development and link our test cases, what we also need to do is also specify which version these requirements are going to be tested in, because that's really important. We need to know which version these features are going to be introduced in. And to do that in SpiraTest, you go back to the planning menu and click on Releases, or you can just choose the Releases option from the submenu. And so what we'll do for today's demo is we'll create two releases, an initial release, which we'll call release 1.0, and that's the first version. And then we'll create a second release, release 2.0, where we'll put the newer functionality. And we can change the dates as well if we like. Let's put that into September. And maybe that will go out till December, November, there you go, like that. Hit save. So we now have two releases. There is also the option to put phases or iterations under a release, and that way if you're doing an agile project, you can, for example, have specific test cases for each sprint, or for a waterfall project, you can have specific test cases for a particular phase, for example, the UAT phase versus the integration testing phase. So if we go back to our requirements right here, what we will want to do is assign which version these requirements are coming in. So let's go back. The ones I imported from our spreadsheet, they have random names, test route 1, test item 2, so we'll leave those for the next version, and instead the ones that we entered in, we'll put those into our first version. So we can go here, and we're going to check the boxes like this, and then we choose edit. We then choose the release 1, we hit the fill down button, and when you hit the fill down button, it populates all of those values with the release. Hit save. And now those requirements are planned for that release. We also might want to do the same thing for the next release. So let's go in here and let's take some of our imported items and we'll assign those to the next release. And you can use Shift Select on the checkboxes. Hit Edit, choose Release 2, hit the Fill button, hit the Save button, and now we've got some requirements planned for release 1 and some requirements planned for release 2. Now at this point you'll notice that the requirements all show not covered. Not covered means they don't have any test cases associated with them, so there is no way we could actually test them. And SpiraTest has a nice shortcut where if you have some requirements and you don't yet have any test cases, you can actually go in here and you can simply check the boxes, say these ones here, and you can do Tools, Create Test Cases, and that will create one test case for each of the requirements. If I hit refresh, you'll see the green bar appear, and then if you go into the test case module, you'll see we do now actually have some test cases. We'll have one for each requirement. Similarly, if we actually click on one of the requirements, which we'll do now, you'll also notice that inside the requirement, it will show you which test cases are associated to it. This is my requirement, this is the main information from comments, and then here's my test coverage, and you'll see there is actually one test case now covering that requirement. But SpiraTest lets you have more than one. So you could have, for example, multiple tests that all have to pass for the requirement to be fully tested, and we'll see that in just a minute. So we now have our requirements loaded into the system and we've mapped them to our releases, so we now know which features we have and when they'll be available. But we don't yet have our full complement of test cases. So what we're going to do is go into the test case testing section, which is right here, and we're going to add some more test cases. And to do that, we can either enter them in directly using the new test case button. So let's have a test case which will be test that you can log in and log out. Let's just make this one log only, and we'll do a separate one for log out. And that's great. Now we also have some test cases we already have from our legacy test management tool, which is Excel. And Excel, as I said, is a great tool for writing things in. It's not so good for managing. It's very hard to do reporting across requirements and test cases. And if you have testers who are running tests and then you have to get all the results and put them together, Excel makes that very difficult. But Excel is a good tool for writing test cases. So if you have them already written in Excel, we do have an option to import them. So in the same way that we had our requirement sheet, we have this test case sheet right here. And to import in, you choose the project name, you choose the type, and you can do export. Now, this sheet is a little more complicated, so I'm actually going to populate this one from scratch. So I'm going to clear what I have. And what we'll do is we'll actually write a test case. So for example, to write a test case in Excel, what you would do is enter in the name of the test case. And so we're going to have the administration section. So let's write an administration test case. So the test case would be create a new user. Okay, and that is a functional test case. And it is ready for review. It's a draft for right now. We can also link it to requirements, components, and releases. We will do that later on inside of SpiraTest. The other thing you have to choose is the row type. And this is the test case, not a folder and not a test step. And down here we'll create another one, which will be to modify an existing user. Notice that you have the indents because of the old content we had in the sheet. So it's really important you move the alignment. Anything created at the top level needs to be right along the left. If you're going to have folders and subfolders, you can nest them using this indent and outdent feature. But if you're not entering any folders in, make sure they're all left aligned. So I'll choose test case again. Oops. There we go. And the third one we'll write will be delete an existing user. So these are my 3 test cases. That's great. So now we have my test case, we need the steps. And to do the steps, you can choose the step from right here. And when you do that, it's going to block off the row and it's going to colorize it so that you know to go to the right. And what we do is to make it easier, I can just copy that. We actually have it so that whenever you change this to step, it blocks off the left-hand side and it makes the right side enabled. It's just formatting. You don't have to have the coloration feature turned on, but what it does is it shows you have to enter the steps here. So the test cases are on the left and directly underneath to the right are the steps. So let's say the first step for creating a new user would be to click on the create user button, and the expected result would be the user create screen appears. We will then enter in the user information, click on the submit button, and then this one would be the data is accepted and the new user is created. So we got one more step than we need, so we'll just get rid of that one. And then we're going to be on the next one, we're going to be basically modifying. So we'll say click on the list of users button. The list of users is displayed. Click on the link for user 1. User 1 page is displayed. Change the name and email, and then we'll copy this. So we're basically putting the data and accepting it, and when we click on the submit button, the user is updated. And then lastly, to delete, we can basically take these two, click on the delete button, the user is deleted. So we have 3 test cases together with a very simple set of steps, and that makes our test script. And so what we'll do now is go back to our add-ins tab, and I just need to do one more thing, which is to move these, put these here. You have to fill out the type field and the status field. And then we're going to go into the export option and connect to the right project, hit export, and let's see what happens. And there we go. We've imported 3 test cases, each with a variety of steps. We go back into SpiraTest, and there we'll see that we have our test cases. And we also have the 3 existing ones that we created from a requirement. The names of those are a little bit weird, so let's go in here and edit them. So we'll say tests that we can create, and this will be test the login with username and password. By default, it creates it with a fake name based on the requirement. So you may want to go in here and clean it up a little bit. Okay, hit save. So we've got our test cases. We also might want to group them into different sections. So let's go into the folder system and let's add a folder. Let's add a functional test folder. And let's add a regression test folder. It's up to you how you organize them. If in your Excel sheet world you are using Windows folders to store the different spreadsheets or a Google Drive, it's the same system. You create folders to categorize them. And you can have different levels. So you could have regression tests, functional tests. You could even have another folder under function, which might be, for example, under function you might have, legacy functional tests, for example, ones that you want to archive. Whatever it is you wish to do, you can have multiple levels of folder though, like that. And all we want to do now is categorize them. So we click on functional, and okay, that's what we'll do is now go back to root, and we'll just take the ones we want for functional. And we'll put all those into our functional folder. And the ones that are left, we'll just pretend those are regression tests. We'll put those into our regression folder like that. Great. So we've now got some test cases. If we go into the functional tests and we go to for example, the test that you can log in, this one is one we created inside of SpiraTest, and it doesn't yet have any steps of any detail. It has basically the name, test that you can log in, and it has one step that says works as expected. Now, in SpiraTest, by default, when you create new test cases, we automatically generate a new step for you, a single step. That means you can write the test case quickly and execute it without having to write the steps. Some of our users really like this feature, but other features really don't want that. They want to write the steps themselves every time. So you can go into the testing section in administration, go to testing settings, and you can choose the option to create default step. When that's turned off, it will no longer create one step for every new requirement. Great, so we've got our test case, we've got that one step. Let's say we want to add a bit more information. The login is a bit more detailed than that. The logout will be fine with one step. So let's go in here and we'll insert a step. So what we'll do is we'll do a new one, which is to click on the login link. The expected result will be is the login page appears. Create a new one after that. Enter the login and password, and if that's correct, the data is accepted. And the last one would be click login. The user is logged in, and the current user is displayed in the footer so that you know you're logged in. Perfect. So there we go. So we've now got our test case. We'll click on this, get rid of that extra one, and now we're good. So we've now got some requirements and test cases. Now this particular test case isn't actually linked to anything. So we can go back to our function requirements, go into authentication, and we can link it. And similarly, we can do the same thing in the reverse direction from the requirements. So if we go back to our requirements page, we'll notice that the login is linked. We actually don't have a login requirement yet. So that's actually an issue. So if we go back to our test cases, one of the things we can always do, if we find we've got a test case without a requirement, we can reverse engineer the requirement from it. So to do that, we click on the actual test case, and then we'll find there's no requirement called logging out, only logging in. It's right there. So we can do create requirement from test case, and that does the reverse thing we saw. It actually creates a new requirement from the test case. And we'll edit that, and we'll call it log out of the system. And we'll change it from a use case to a feature. So that's great. So we now have a full set of requirements, and we've got test coverage. Some of these later requirements in version 2 we haven't yet got test cases for, and that's fine. So now we have our test cases. We could just assign these directly to our tester. So to do that, we could go in here and we could say, let's have someone test this feature. Click on Edit, and we'll assign it to Fred and hit Save. That's the simplest way of assigning it to someone. However, let's pretend we've got a bigger project, because oftentimes we will have the same test case we want to assign to different people. For example, I want Fred to test it using IE, and I want Joe to test it using Firefox. So to do that, you can use our test set feature. The test sets are a way of creating groups of tests that you can assign for different purposes. So let's create two test sets. We'll call one testing release 1 on Firefox, and we'll create another test set called testing release 1.0 on IE. If we go into our test set right here, we want to assign these tests to the test case. So we go into the set, we can choose our functional folder, and we can pick and choose which test we want to actually run. So we'll just check these four, like that. And maybe we want to log out as well. So let's just add that one at the end. So we've now got a set of tests that we can run. And instead of assigning these individually to someone, I can now assign the whole lot in one go to Fred. Or actually Joe, I think. There we go, to Joe. You can also add a comment at this point and explain, hi Joe, please run these tests. And that's how you set up a test set with the test cases. So the next thing we're going to do is actually run the test cases. So I've assigned it to Joe. So let's actually log out and let's log back in as Joe. So I'm logging in as Joe Smith. Please change. And if we scroll down, we'll see our assigned test cases. So here we have the assigned test set, testing release 1.0 on Firefox. And I hit the play button right here, and that's going to tell SpiraTest that I'm going to run this test. So I'll choose my release 1.0. We haven't got a build server hooked up like Jenkins or TeamCity, so that's empty. But if we had a build server, we could actually pick that and actually have the results we record tied to a specific build. So hit next. And what we're going to do now is actually log some results. So let's pretend we're going to log in. Well, we actually do have an application we can test. So I'll put it over here. So this is our application. Log in. We'll log in with librarian. And if we go back to our test case, click on the login link, that worked. Enter the login and password, data is accepted. Click on pass. The whole first test case worked. Now the user on this system doesn't actually have a user, but we have an author. So we click on author management. We can then create an author. Now, one of the things we do have in SpiraTest to make this easier is the mini view, because I only have one screen during this webinar, so it's hard for me to show you both at once. I have to Alt-Tab. Many testers will actually have in real life two screens, one screen that has the application, and one screen that has the SpiraTest running. But when you only have one screen, there's a nice shortcut we have called the mini view. Click on that, click on this little icon, and you can actually split the URL and actually have that running inside of SpiraTest, which is very handy because then I can now show you how to run the test and record the results at the same time. So we'll click on the Create User button. Okay, that passes. Then we're going to go enter the user information. So we'll say enter, the author would be Michael Dobbs, age, not sure, 42. Insert. That's great. News users created. That looks correct for me. Click on the list of users button because we're going to modify a user. So we go back to the user list. That's right. Click on the link for user 1. Here's user 1. Edit. change the name in email. Well, there isn't an email in this version of the system, so that's actually an issue. So let's actually log a failure. So I'll go back to the full screen version right here. I'm going to take a screenshot of it, print screen on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go back and paste it in right here. And I'm going to log an actual result. There is no email field on the screen. We have a bug in the system. Well, issue. We've got a field that's not visible, for example, or maybe they didn't implement the feature properly. Either way, it's definitely something that's not correct. So we'll mark that as a failure. And that's how you log a test result. Now, the other thing is we could also log a defect. We didn't do that. So to log a defect, we go back one step. You go to the Incident tab, and I'm going to go back to the regular view. It makes it a bit easier to see everything on the webinar, and you enter in the incident information. So if it's a new issue that no one's seen before, you will often want to log a defect. So let's just say missing email field on the author screen, user screen. So we'll log that as a bug. Hi, and that's fine. Hit fail. So this time it failed it, but it also logged a defect. And if you go back, you'll see there's a defect right here. And if you find you've actually got an existing defect that already covers the issue, you can use this link option if you have permissions to actually link the existing defect. So now we could carry on with the testing. In this case, we might find that because we can't edit the user, it doesn't make any sense to proceed. And in fact, in this case, I don't think we even have a delete option. So we'll log that as a blocked result, unable to complete, functionality not available yet. And that's where the block feature comes in. Blocked is when you can tell someone that I can't test this yet, it's just not ready. Blocked. And then lastly, can we log out? Well, actually, we can still do that. So that does pass. We'll go back here and log out. Pass. We've now finished all of our test cases. The first two passed. The second one failed. The third one blocked. The fourth one passed again. So we'll hit finish. And we've now done our testing. And if you go back to the testing test cases, you will now see that we have some results. 3 passed, 1 failed, 1 blocked. If I click on the folder, I can drill down and see the actual results. Furthermore, I can also go to the planning section and look at my requirements matrix, and it will show me here the impact. You'll see that there are a bunch of requirements in gray. They've not been run yet. We'll also see a bunch of requirements that are green or partially green because they've passed. Now, we don't see any reds yet, and that would imply that perhaps the modify existing user doesn't actually link to a requirement. So in a real situation, we would need to look here and see, well, there's actually no functionality for modifying users. We actually have a missing feature. We have the ability to create and delete users, but we don't have the ability to modify. So that's why the red is not showing up. So it's a good way of double checking if you're not missing anything. So as the user, I logged my test failure. I logged a defect too. And if I go to the tracking instance section, I will see right here, there's a missing field defect logged. And you've got these little graphs that show you the number of defects that are outstanding. And if I click on it, I will see the defect. It automatically populates the name of the defect, the expected result, the actual result, and the screenshot, and where the actual issue occurred in the steps. So when the developer gets this, they're going to be able to easily reproduce it. So let's log back out as Fred and log back in as my main administration user that I first was logged in as. And if I go back to my project and look at my incidents, I'm going to assign this and triage it. So this is where I would go in here, and I can use the workflow system under operations to assign it. So when I choose the assignment, some other fields now become available and some fields become required. And if I hit the save button, it's going to tell me all the fields I have to fill out. So I need to fill out the owner, and that's going to be, in this case, Fred, and the start date, which would be on Friday, let's say, and the estimated effort is 5 hours. And you can customize which fields you want to make required, which fields are optional. And let's add a comment too. Hi Fred, please fix. Hit save, and that's going to assign it to Fred, and Fred will now need to fix it. And in a real situation, Fred would log in, fix the bug, and we'd retest it. But for today's demonstration, we're going to move on a little bit onto the reporting side. So when we go into reporting, if you go to the dashboard, you'll notice that we have several reports available here. So right out of the box, we have this test execution status graph, and that shows you the number of test cases that are passed and failed. So we have 1 failure, 3 passed, 3 not run, and 1 blocked. You can also filter it by release as well to look at just release 1 or just release 2. The requirements coverage graph will show you what is your total requirements coverage, and you'll notice we have a whole bunch of requirements that are not covered, and those are requirements that don't yet have any test cases. So those would have to actually be written, assuming that we were interested in those requirements. Now they're currently in release 2, so if we filter this by release 1, they'll be excluded, and so it won't matter. But once we start looking at release 2, we'll need to write some test cases for those requirements. There's also some that are not run, so we need to get those executed and either a pass or failure recorded. If we go back to our requirements, we can show you the effect that a change will make. So if I go back here and I realize I'm missing a requirement, I go back in, I go insert, new child requirement, ability to update users. That's pretty important. And we can assign that for release 1. When we click on it, we can now link our missing test case to this. And when we do that, we'll choose add, and you can then go to the root, and then you choose your folder. If you don't know which folder it's in or you don't know the name, you can just do a search by name, for example, as well. We'll just browse to it. And there it is, modify existing, hit save, and there it is, and it will show you as failed. And now if I go back to my requirements list, we now see the failures show up right here, and the status for the requirements as a whole is updated as well. And if you go to our main dashboard, we'll now see what we would have expected, I think, is to see some requirements failed. And this is our requirements coverage. We've got passes, failures, not run uncovered. The block doesn't show up because that also is not linked to a requirement. And so that's why these different graphs give you a different picture. The requirements coverage graph shows you the test status as it relates to the requirements you currently care about, whereas the testing graph is going to give you all of the test results irrespective of requirements. In addition to these, you can also go into the reporting section and get some other graphs. So for example, the date range graph, that's going to show you the number of defects logged. And you can see here we've logged 1 defect, and it's right here. And the orange line will show you the number that are closed. Obviously we haven't closed it yet, and then that will go up when we do. You can see it as a data grid, and you can export it to a CSV file as well. The test graph will show you the same thing, but for the test results. Here you can see the test results over time. And here you'll see today we've logged 3 passes, 1 blocked, and there's also a failure that's right behind it. When you have things that overlap, it's hard to see, and that's where the data grid can be useful because it shows you the actual numbers. We can also use the other graphs to get a snapshot. So if we want to see the distribution of our test cases, so did they pass or fail by priority, for example, there you go. We'll see that there's a bunch here that have no priority. They're not run yet. We can also change the status to be perhaps by the type of test case or the status, or by the person, so by the owner. So you can slice and dice your graph, your data, and export it. And if you want it in a spreadsheet, you can just choose the export button, and out it comes like this. Similarly, you want to look at your requirements. You might want to see your requirements by the type of requirement or the status against the release. So we look at version 1 versus version 2, the status, and so you can graph and chart the requirements in the same way. And the last thing you can do is print out reports. So these are graphs. We also have printable reports. So you might want to get a summary report of all of your requirements and your test cases, and do they fully trace. So that way we can find any test cases that aren't linked to requirements, or any requirements that are missing test cases, which we did see in the application. And in real life, we often miss things. So it's good to be able to run a report and get a summary. You can filter by all the fields that you have in the system. Or if you just want everything, you can leave them blank, and you can just leave the default sort and hit create. If you give the report a name, you can save it and share it with the team, or if you want to run it right away, you just click the button and it generates. It's running the report in the background. This is a relatively small report because it's a small project. It may take a bit longer for a larger realistic report. And here you see your requirements traceability matrix. And if you look carefully, we can look to see, are we missing any test cases? Right now, all of our requirements look like they have test cases for release 1. Some of the ones that are not part of release 1 don't yet have test cases, but that's to be expected. If we go down to our functional tests, we'll look to see, are we missing any? And in fact, we'll notice right here, the reason that block test case didn't appear is because the delete user test case is orphaned. It isn't supporting any requirement. And so we would want to link that to our create and delete requirement. You can also then give this to a client as well once you've got full test coverage to prove that you've got everything covered. There are also other reports you can run in the system. We're not just limited to the matrix. You can also generate document style reports. So for example, when you are using an Excel sheet to do your test management, you have to manually cut and paste the data together, create it in a form that you can give to a client. With SpiraTest, you can just go to, for example, the requirements detail report, choose the output format, choose which elements to include, hit the button, and now you've got a full test report that you can give to a client with all the requirements, all the test cases, all the results, all the defects in a single report. So this shows us all of our requirements, it shows us the change history, and it shows you the test cases that are mapped to it, the status of them, and any defects that were logged right here. So that's an overview of SpiraTest. If we go back to our original presentation, we've gone through setting up a new installation, the initial configuration changes, creating a project. We added some requirements and test cases from Excel. We executed some tests, recorded some results, and included a screenshot. We logged some bugs. We went through the reporting and dashboards quickly, and now it's time for the Q&A.